Hello, this is Leslie Walker-Hirsch, and today I have the great pleasure of talking with Susan Yuan. Dr. Yuan is formerly, I'm going to read this because it's a big long introduction. Susan Yuan is a mother of a 43-year-old man with Angelman syndrome, and she has a PhD in psychology. She is formerly the Associate Director of the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at the University of Vermont in Burlington. She is currently the president of the Association for Successful Parenting, also known as TASP, T-A-S-P. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning.
I'm so happy to finally see you on Skype and to speak to you. So let's get started. Can you tell our listeners and our viewers, actually, a little bit about TASP and how you got started in undertaking that great endeavor?
Well, TASP is an organization of people who are committed to enhancing the rights of parents who have intellectual disabilities to be able to succeed at raising their children. And we got started because there were different groups, little pockets of people around the country who were doing this. Some who had programs themselves that had parents that they were trying to help, and some who were researchers, some who were social workers who were kind of wrestling with how do we appropriately work with these families. And some were parents themselves who were just out there trying to succeed and not necessarily connected to anyone who could help. And also some lawyers. The lawyers are some of the most committed people working on this issue.
That's refreshing to hear about lawyers, frankly.
Yes, we probably have the most committed lawyers that I've ever met in terms of true commitment to the rights of people with disabilities.
Well, that's wonderful. So who funds you currently? Because this is not something that I know about. So tell me a little more and tell our listeners too.
Well, we'll take any money we can get.
Welcome to the world of 501s, right?
Right, exactly. We have a conference every 2 years. And if we get enough attendance at the conference, we have a pot of money to run on for the next 2 years until the next conference. And we also have membership, but we have not been very good about collecting dues. And we also get an occasional donation, but they're few and far between. Right now, we have a contract with Washington, D.C. to do a project down there to support parents who are served both by their child welfare program and their developmental services division. And that has, even though it's kind of changed the nature of what we do a little, it's put us a bit more into the direct service world. It has given us some money to run on, which we're very pleased with.
That makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. Having a little pocket that's full of money. It's hard to come by these days.
Yes.
Well, now, not that long ago, if a woman with an intellectual disability gave birth to a child, that child was automatically taken from her care, and supposedly for the safety of the child. So when did that injustice start to change, and how do you account for that?
Well, it still happens way too often. It hasn't changed as much as it needs to change. But through the conferences that we had and the work that we've done over the years, we finally managed, along with some other advocates, working cross-disability, to get the National Council on Disability to do a report on parents with disabilities. And it's a great report. It's called Rocking the Cradle. And anyone can get a copy for free by going to www.ncd.gov, G-O-V. And it's a very thick report. It's an extremely good report, about 360 pages long. And it has everything that you ever wanted to learn about the situation of parents with disabilities, going from the research to the actual current situation for people. And that came out in 2012. And then in 2015, there was a very important case in Massachusetts, which was very similar to what you just described, that the parent really didn't have a chance to prove whether she could or not. And there were even some fairly good supports in place, and they never had a chance to be used because the baby was just taken straight from the hospital. But one of the things we've done through TASP is to emphasize that assessments of parents with disabilities have got to be done by somebody who knows disability. Because most assessments for parenting are done by psychologists who have no real exposure to parents with intellectual disabilities. And they go on assumptions rather than actual facts. And anyway, to just very quickly get to how we moved this forward, we had a very good assessor, Dr. Nicole Brisson, who went in and did an assessment of this family. And the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights of Health and Human Services took on the case. And because of the assessment that was done, they won the case. But not only did they win the case, the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights put out findings about this situation. And then TASP worked with those two offices to come up with guidance for child welfare agencies. So the guidance is out there. It doesn't mean it's being followed. But the Office of Civil Rights is still and the Department of Justice, they're still taking on these cases, even under the new administration. They're doing it more quietly. Well, but they're still taking on these cases.
That's good to know. So, in graduate school, which was for me when the earth was cooling, I remember reading some research by a man named Edgerton who had concluded that parenting by mothers with intellectual disabilities worked out okay until the child was about 7 or 8. And at that time, things kind of went south. And that was about the age that they said the child had exceeded the intellectual capacity of the parent. So has that changed? And if so, what happened to change it?
Well, what happened is that people began to realize that parents don't do this thing totally alone. None of us raise our kids totally alone. We have schools, we have relatives, we have communities, we have churches, whatever is available out there. And it became important to emphasize to these families that they need to be connected as much as possible.
It's okay. Reality comes into play sometimes.
Right. So what's been discovered since then is that really what you need to have is an additional person, a trusted person like a mentor or a teacher or a relative who will continue to be an ongoing presence in the life of the child as a supplement.
Well, in fact, that old circle of friends and having a group of support people around you that you trust and who care about you and care for you and support you becomes so important.
Right. And it's important as the child grows to adolescence. It's important that the phone...
Just disregard the phone call.
Okay. It's important sometimes to help the parent understand that their son or daughter is becoming an adult, and to help them recognize that and to support it. And that's where these are the kinds of things that we can put in place for parents with disabilities. And sometimes they can cook along fine for several years, and then you have to step in and help a bit, and then you can back out again.
So, what parents with intellectual disabilities are good candidates for success with the TASP support? Because I know sometimes parents with intellectual disabilities don't want to take the advice or the support that others offer.
Well, I would say that, first of all, IQ is not important. The research has found that IQ really isn't relevant until it's between 50 and 60. And most parents, most people with intellectual disabilities who become parents have IQs higher. And a parent with any IQ can be a bad parent or a good parent. And it's the same with parents with intellectual disabilities. So that's not relevant. What's relevant, as you suggested, is a willingness to accept the fact that all of us require help in this process. And it also requires people working with the family who respect the fact that they are the parent and are not going to try to take over.
If only I could have taught that to my mother, who thought she was going to be in charge, but I put an end to that.
Right. And, it's the same thing with anyone that doesn't particularly want to have help, that you start where they are and you try to find out something that they really actually want to do and begin to reinforce the positive things and build a relationship. Like everything else in the field of developmental disability, it's the relationships that are important.
Yes, it is. So parents worry greatly, and I underline greatly, about their daughters with intellectual disabilities becoming pregnant and wanting to parent their child. So do you support the whole family? And what role can grandparents play in this? Now that I'm a grandparent, I want to know about that.
Grandparents, if they are willing to basically accept the situation and to try to work along with their son or daughter to make this work, they can be a tremendous support to the family. In fact, some of the most successful situations are those that have a grandparent or have extended family. It doesn't have to be a grandparent, but have extended family, and that's just because that's a good social network. The things that don't work so well are trying to take over. And
I know all about that.
Some of those situations just require sensitive working. Working with both the grandparent and the parent. Sometimes there are grandparents groups that form, especially not necessarily with regard to families of children with intellectual disabilities, but with the current drug crisis. Huge numbers of grandparents are raising their grandchildren. And they can get their own kinds of support built, their kind of peer support. I'm all for peer support. And that includes peer support for parents who have disabilities. If there are other parents who have, maybe they're a couple of years ahead of the parent that you're working with or the parent that you know, they can provide some of the best support. We also use peer navigators who are experienced parents of children with disabilities or experienced parents with disabilities to support other families. Those are very successful and very inexpensive.
I would imagine. That's very creative. So is there a growing demand for TASP support? And so that is that increasing in recent times?
The problem, which I know you'll understand, is that there's a recognition of the need for support. But in terms of actually building programs or getting concrete supports out there for parents, the funding is a real challenge. and it requires a lot of advocacy. For instance, our state here in Vermont has a priority for supporting parents who have disabilities as part of its system of care plan. But there are very few states that have that.
So, because not everybody is as organized as Vermont and as TASP is, and fortunate to have you there, what advice would you give to other people across the country who might want to provide this kind of support service or begin a program such as yours, and how would they reach you to tap into your expertise?
Well, I'll start with the easiest part, how they reach us. We have a website, which is www.achancetoparent.org. And we have a number of resources, and we have all of our contact information on that website. And if people contact us by telephone, we have a number on there. We return the call. Or if they contact us by email, we return the call or we return the email. And we're willing to basically try to help anybody who contacts us. One of the things that frequently happens is that we get asked for interviews for mainstream media, which we're very pleased about, because when a magazine or a newspaper or a television station finds out that there's an injustice going on, they can do a great deal to raise consciousness in a region about that. And we've done a lot of interviews with media. Also, we know where the people are around the country who have the expertise. For instance, there's this great program in northern Massachusetts called the Positive Parenting Program. And they have an apartment program where when a family, when the child goes into state's custody, they can go, the parent and the child can go and live in this apartment program where there's nobody watching over their shoulder all the time, but there's always someone there to answer questions. And there are training programs that go on. These are the things we can refer people to.
Susan, it's been a long and difficult time for us to figure out how to have this interview. And I'm so glad that you and I both persisted, because this is so important to share with other people who are reading this newsletter. And I want to thank you again for taking time out of your very busy day to technologize and speak with me and make this interview. And I hope I'll see you again soon at the AAID conference in St. Louis.
Well, I look forward to it, and I've enjoyed talking with you finally.
Thanks so much, Susan. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.